So keep in mind, we're approaching that age-old issue of pain and suffering tonight. So we'll get it solved in an hour. Yeah, right. This is just an opening. So I hope you decide to go a little further with it on your own. I'll give you some resources, and I'll send you an outline. So you don't, if you want to take notes, that's fine. So keep in mind, what I'm trying to do for this series is keep going back to that book called The God Conversation. So I'm going to get some of my ideas from that. It's optional. You don't need to buy the book. It's been around for quite a while, so you can probably find a used copy. So that'd be kind of nice, if you want it. Now here's the advantage of it. It's a wonderful book because it's by J.P. Moreland. Everything he puts out is high class. The problem with it is he says, I want to use illustrations and examples and stories because that's what people remember. And we talked about that briefly last week. And so that's great. Here's the problem. He was often using, and he had to do it because the book's like 20 years old, so he's using things that were in the news 20 years ago. So I'm updating some of them. I think some of them have been around enough that you'll recognize them anyway and you won't have a problem with them. But so I looked at them and said, well, a few of those we're not going to mess with because they're ancient history. So anyway, just keep in mind, that's what I'm going to try to do, is tell some stories. So God and the problem of evil. So I'm going to start with two stories. One is by somebody you don't know, and one is my story of somebody who's in my family. So the person you don't know, I'll give you his last name in a second because you might recognize him. His name is Michael. And Michael says he came from he got involved in Christianity. His parents weren't Christians, but he got involved. He called himself one of the Jesus people back in the 60s and 70s, and tried to proselytize and evangelize door to door, all sorts of stuff. Now keep in mind, this is his claim, I don't know. But then he had a girlfriend when he was in college, and she got in a terrible car accident and broke her back. And she was paraplegic from the waist down, couldn't move. And he said that didn't put him over the edge, but he'd already had some questions about Christianity, but he said he thought about that, and he thought, well, if God's real, he wouldn't want this beautiful young lady to be lying there in the hospital. And so he prayed and he prayed and he prayed. She didn't get better. And so you may have stories like that. You may know of people like that. Okay, so that's one story. Here's the second story. I have a cousin named Bob. And we were always really close because he was born on my birthday. I'm older, so I always lorded it over him. But anyway, so he was born on my birthday. Here's the problem. He was born fine, but he was premature, so they put him in one of those incubators. This is the 1950s. Oh. Do you know where I'm going with this? The pure oxygen burned his retina. Right. But he didn't know it. He wasn't in any pain. His parents didn't know it. And it wasn't until months later he's not tracking, anything. And so there's strike one. Then when he gets older, my dad's family got wiped out by a certain kind of kidney disease, and I avoided it. So I'm okay. I got tested. But Bob, I mean, here he is blind. Now he's got the kidney disease. So he's now got blindness and he's on dialysis. His kidney's completely shut down. Then he got COVID. And the combination of all of that, he passed away about 1.5 or 2 years ago. So I lost him. And so I think about this problem of pain and evil and suffering. It's not just a philosophical thing to me. Oh, I forgot to tell you, the person's last name, Michael, he said that's it. He didn't want anything to do with God because he didn't heal that sweet girlfriend that he had. So his full name is Michael Shermer. Do you recognize that name?
Yeah.
Do you recognize him? Do you know?
Yeah, he's a famous atheist and skeptic, and I'm trying to remember the organization / magazine.
Skeptic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, he's one of the top tier go-to guys for atheists.
Yeah, you can find him on YouTube. Here's the good thing about him. He's very kind, he's very pleasant. He's not an angry atheist. So, I mean, there are some of those that just want to burn everything down, but he's not that way. He's very pleasant. Greg Kokel has had a go around with him, an interesting debate. So I just think that's really sad. He gave up on Christianity. He's gone full bore, got this magazine going, and a popular guy. He writes books and things like that. So he encountered pain and suffering and evil and walked away from Christianity. So we see things like this, don't we? This was the Ukraine invasion not too long ago. This is from a British newspaper. Notice how they're using that word evil. I want to come back to that later tonight, but they use that word evil. 9/11. Our nation saw, there it is, the word evil. It kind of gone out of everybody's vocabulary until 9/11 or Ukraine. People didn't really want to talk much about evil things, but it was back. This is a quickie graveyard in Brazil after some of the COVID deaths. And you see headlines like this. It's pretty hard to watch the news, isn't it? It's hard to pick up a newspaper. You kind of go, because it's such bad news out there. So what we're going to do, first part of tonight is walk through at least some potential answers. Now, are all these answers going to be satisfying? I don't think so. You'll still have a lot of people struggling, and that's okay. Like I said, we're just doing surface tonight, and this might be something you really want to get into a little bit more in depth, because people have this question. If there's a good God, you know the rest of that sentence. If there's a good God, why is there so much pain and suffering? If he's all powerful, he could get rid of it. If he's good, he'd want to get rid of it. So something's amiss there. Either he's not powerful, or he's not good, or he's not there at all. And so that's been some of the problem with it. So we'll walk through some of the, at least potential answers. So I'm going to tell you a story again, but this one you already know. The story of Job in the Bible. You know, there's Satan comes and is talking to God, and they basically make kind of a cosmic bet. You know, Job only loves you because he's been having good fortune. No wonder he's happy and he praises God. Let me at him. And God says, okay, you can't kill him. So the family goes, all of his fortune goes, and you know that story. The whole book is him with some friends sitting around trying to scratch their heads to figure out, why is this happening? By the way, the friends did the best thing they could at the beginning. Do you remember what happens? They come and they sit down and they shut up. Shut up. They just sit with him. And then they opened their mouths and messed up everything. Because they said, oh, come on, Job. You've done something. Why don't you tell us what it is? God's he's not going to strike you, you know, and you must have been up to something bad. No, no, no. And so, in a sense, Job shakes his fist. By the way, they always talk about Job as an example of patient suffering. No way, he's not patient at all. So he really challenges God. Come on, God, what's going on here? And then God shows up. Oops. And God says, hey, Job, let me ask you a couple of questions. Yeah. Were you there when and they fill in the blank, when I created these animals, when I created the stars, when I created the earth? And Job says this. Surely I spoke of things I didn't understand. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Yeah. So here's what's going on. Job initially was thinking, if I can't come up with a good reason for what's happening to me, then there's either no God or God's messed up. Right? Does that make sense? That was the thought that was going on in that time period. And that's what atheists used to use as an attack on Christianity or any kind of theist. They'd say, well, we can't think of any reason why people would go through pain and suffering, therefore there's no God. But here's the good news. That's not used anymore by atheists. They've given up on this because, and you can guess, we may not know enough. For heaven's sakes, we're finite creatures. And you're dealing with an infinite God. It'd be like us trying to deal with ants and try to, well, probably even further apart than that, but try to make sense of them. Yes, there can be, we may not know it, but there can be some reasons that we don't know about. We can't even picture it. We have no conception because we're like this compared to an infinite God. So the atheists have given up. They don't think that's a good argument anymore. How about number two? What happened during the fall? Everything went south, fast, right? It ruined everything. I mean, think about what it's done to people. We got clashes of people all the time now. We got all this brutality. We've got sexual trafficking. We got bullying, on and on and on. People treat each other so badly. What did it do? So that ruined the lateral relationship. What did it do for the vertical? Well, we screwed that up too, right? We ruined the relationship with God. So he's not there for us, or that's what we think, and that connection's been broken for a lot of people. And it messed up nature. So just about anything that we touch has gone bad because of the fall. Now, non-Christians, of course, are not going to buy into this fall business, but I'm just saying among Christians, we would say, yeah, that's one of the reasons why we're dealing with a broken world. Okay, this is one of the places where I'm asking you to tell some stories. Did you get my email? We'll see what happens. All right, so here's a third thing that I think is why we deal with pain and suffering. It brings us down a notch, maybe several. So I get to tell you my story, and I'm hoping I hear from some of you. Short, a couple of sentences, okay? Mine's only a couple of sentences. So I used to have my act completely together. I thought I could do anything. Everything I set out to do, I achieved. And so, you know, life was great. And then several years ago, it wasn't severe, but I got depression, some mild depression. And I thought, I guess I don't control everything that I think I control. So that was a real eye-opener. So that's supposed to be behind the wheel, you know, I'll take over, God, thanks very much. It's like, no, not necessarily. So anybody have a story like that, where everything was okay, you thought life was fine, and then pain and suffering made you realize, maybe I don't have the control that I thought I had? Got an example for us?
Yeah, I can relate to Paul with the thorn in his side. So I was a pretty athletic guy my whole life.
This is Chris, by the way.
I just burned the candle at both ends, and then I got Lyme disease, and I got humbled. And from that point on, I had a side effect, which I have to this day. So I have a thorn in my side for the last 17 years, and there is no cure for it.
Wow.
So it's a constant 24/7 reminder of what God can do and how He constantly reminds me every day.
Yeah. Yes.
My name's Lisa, nice to meet all of you. I think just as a parent, I have young adults now, 2 girls, and as a parent, you do all the right things, and we homeschooled, and we were in church, and you do all this, and you hope that they turn out okay, but then when you watch them walk through their struggles, and you think, what did I do wrong? How did I, right? I did all the right things, God, what's going on? And you realize that it's that control thing, right? That you have to let them walk their own path, and it hurts you to watch them suffer, and that's hard too, not just you necessarily experiencing something yourself, but through the eyes of your children, and then like you literally can't do anything about it. I mean, you try, but sometimes they just have to go through that stuff, and all you can do is just pray and hope that they,
Because you could control them when they're younger, but
right?
yeah,
exactly.
Right. Yes, Bonnie.
Well, I was married when I was 19, and I thought I had the perfect family. And the next thing I know, the youngest little girl, 23 months old, was killed in the playground.
Oh.
My first husband died about 18 years later. My oldest daughter died when she was 44. My second husband died 2.5 years ago. And I'm raising a special needs, autistic, pervasive developmental disorder grandson. But God's good. I've had cancer. I've had 16 surgeries, 10 of them on my back. But for some reason, I'm still strong and healthy.
Wow. Wow. It's hard to go on after something like that. Here's another thing you might think about. Think of the connection. We have gone through things that have humbled us, and as a result, and I think about my story, I think I had a lack of empathy for people that struggled with anything mental, and I had a relative who had agoraphobia. And way back when, I would think, well, good grief, all you have to do, if you're scared about getting out in public, you take 2 steps and go back to the house. And the next day you take 4 steps. I mean, I had it all figured out. And then when I went through the depression, I thought, I don't have it figured out. You know, I can't get it through my head to fix me. You know, how am I going to fix her? And so it caused me to think, wow, you know, I should just shut up and just be there for her if she has any issues or questions. But I think there's an ability for people, even take it outside of the Christian realm. If you've struggled with anything like drugs or smoking or drinking or whatever, you're the one that can come alongside somebody if you've gone through that. I never got into drugs, so, and I was a product of the 60s, which is pretty amazing. But I didn't go through, I've never used any drugs, so I would be a terrible drug counselor. You know, I have empathy for the people, but not the kind of empathy that somebody would have who's been there and struggled and knows what that's like to fight that all the time. Anybody have a story? Is there anything that you've gotten involved with to help people because either you dealt with it or somebody in your family dealt with it and now you say, I want to be there for them? Trace?
This isn't my story, but the senior pastor at College Avenue Baptist Church, Chris Hilkin, just told this story during the sermon. I'll try and keep it brief, but when his wife was just a go-getter, had like 4 businesses going and everything, and at the birth of their 5th child, she experienced some chronic pain, turned out to be a pulmonary embolism, and she just had this feeling like, I'm going to die, and no counseling would fix it. She was losing sleep, 10 days straight, no sleep whatsoever. They measured her like fight or flight response, and it was through the roof. And tried everything between pharmaceuticals and counseling and laying out of hands, you name it, they tried it. And she eventually went to a mental health facility in Arizona and was there for like 9-10 days, and then they got a call, Chris got a call that his wife had attempted suicide and was successful. So here he is, now left with 5 young children and wondering, okay, what do I do now? And he's since dealt with it, gotten back up, picked up the pieces, and God is really blessing him as a result. If you wanted to look it up, I think that sermon's probably online by now, but that's an incredibly powerful story.
Wow.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
But he has amazing empathy for people in similar situations.
Sure. Yeah. One more maybe before we move on. How about number 5? Remember the megaphones in the old days? I guess cheerleaders probably still have them and all. But pain and suffering is kind of like a slap across the face to say, hey, wake up. And this is what C.S. Lewis said. He said, pain and suffering is a megaphone, there it is, to rouse a deaf world. Hey! And so I'll give you an example in just a minute here. But I mean, you just look around. How far do you have to look before you see terrible things going on? So I want to tell you another story here. We recognize this guy. Okay, so American Idol wanted to give back to make themselves look good, I guess. So they were doing something with a village in Africa, and they sent Kyle to go there and to just be the face of American Idol and walk around through this village and all. So he did, and he saw all these people suffering, I mean, big time suffering there in Africa. He said, I didn't know this existed. And then he said, this isn't right. And so in other words, Cowell had it made. I mean, he still probably has it made, but he's got a great lifestyle, I'm sure, and he lives at the fanciest places and dines at the fanciest places. And then he got a wake-up call. And he went there and he found out there's a lot of this going on in the world that he wasn't aware of.
Gee, must have his head in a bucket if he didn't know about stuff like that.
Well, but it's right in his face,
Yeah.
It's one thing to flip through a magazine and, or you get something at home that says, if $10 a month you can feed a starving child. I mean, a lot of people, that's in the trash. How about number 6? I want to share something with you here. This is every woman's dream. It's a doll. It's called Mr. Wonderful. So let me see if I can see.
You're going shopping by yourself? How about if I tag along and carry your bags? Actually, I'm not sure which way to go. I'll turn in here and ask directions. I love you. Yes, dear. You've been on my mind all day. That's why I bought you these flowers.
So there are a total of, I forgot how many.
16.
16, yeah, 16 different phrases. Here are a couple more. Here, you take the remote. As long as I'm with you, I don't care what we watch. That's especially funny to me. Honey, why don't we just relax? You just relax, let me make dinner tonight. I think it's really important that we talk about our relationship. So, you probably know where I'm going with this one.
What I want to know is, where do I get that doll?
Actually, Josh, who was here last week, one of the pastors, I told him I was using a God Conversation book, and he said, "Oh, that's a great book." And I said, "Don't you love the Mr. Wonderful part?" He said, "I've got the doll." I said, "Can I borrow it?" So he showed up. I was teaching another Sunday school class called SALT. It's a good class in case you guys are looking for a Sunday school class. So he brings it and hands it to me before class starts. I'm walking around with this doll. I had a lot of explaining to do. People are looking at that. But I mean, can you see the problem with this? Would you want a real person to have a chip in the back of their head, and if you touch their palm, they would say those kinds of things? That's not real, right? It's all programmed. That's just a mechanical response. And so one answer to the problem of pain and evil is that God thought free will was so important to give us a chance to be real and not to be robots programmed to say, "I love you, God." So he didn't do that, and he allowed us to be so free that we can actually reject him if we choose to. So that's called the free will argument. Last week I mentioned the parable of the prodigal son, and you notice what happened there? Everything was okay, he got his dad's money and all that stuff, and then pain and suffering came, he lost it all, and he's eating the stuff with all the pigs, looking at them, and they're looking at him, and thinking, what have I done? This is terrible. And what did he do? He ran back. I need my dad, just like we need God, and God was right there willing to meet with him. But pain and suffering can sometimes drive people to God. How about this? Football is in season right now. In fact, thanks for coming out. I think there's a Thursday night game, so don't leave. But I mean, think about what these guys do. What do they say? No pain, no gain. Those guys bang into each other and get all bruised up and go through sweating, 2-hour workouts or 3-hour workouts, whatever it is. And they're doing it because how many coaches do you hear over and over say, well, winning and losing, that's important, but I'm trying to build character, especially on the high school level, probably not so much on the real high power college level, but a lot of coaches say it's all about building character. And so you take a verse like Romans 5, it says suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. I love that sequence, do you? I mean, think about that. So these guys are suffering, and we go through maybe different kinds of suffering. But if you hang in there, what are you developing? Perseverance. You keep going. You know you can do it. God will be there. You can handle it. And if you hang in there long enough, it changes you. Your character is now a different character. You have more hope. You radiate more. People come to you realizing, wow, that person's gone through a lot, still seems to be hanging in there. And then because of that, hope comes. You can do it, and if something else comes into your life, you can handle that as well. I'm an English major, so every time I think about this verse, I think about John Keats. You recognize the name Keats? He was a poet back in the early 1800s. He called the earth, this world that we live in, he called it the veil of soul making, which I thought was an interesting way to put things. In other words, you're going through life and you're creating your soul. I don't mean the part that goes on after you die, but just your character. This world is a place to work on your soul, work on your character. And some people do it very well and others don't do it very well at all. So some people will say, okay, all right, so there are some of those things out there, but why doesn't God just stop it? He's got the power. Imagine he's up there with a taser and you do something wrong, or you don't do something you ought to do. You see something, you go, I should help out there. I didn't. Ow! I mean, anybody see a problem to that world? Georgie? What are you?
Yeah, you'd never grow.
Never grow.
You'd
Yeah.
never grow.
It takes away our free will as well.
Yeah. You get a lot of twitchy people too. Yeah, exactly. You're only being good because you're worried about getting hit next. So that doesn't change the inside of you. It changes just the outside. You're just doing things mechanically again to avoid any of that pain. So it's no change of heart that's happening in that kind of situation if God's going to hit you every time. I don't know if you recognize Father Damien here, the story of the leper colony. That's quite a story. I'd forgotten that. I think I'd heard it a long time ago. This is him as a young man and him when he was working with the lepers. So this is a real quickie story here. But in 1873, Damien hears about this leper colony. It's on Molokai, which is one of the islands in Hawaii. And they have no doctor, no priest. They just drop them off and say, good luck to you. And so these people are just suffering. They're just left to suffer. And he said, I can't do that. I don't want to hear about that. And he volunteers and he goes to Molokai, and for 12 years he ministers to these people. And then one Sunday he stands up and he says, we lepers, and he opens up his robe and he shows that he's starting to get leprosy himself. So here's where we're going to connect it to the idea of God. Do you think those lepers felt better about him before or after he revealed his own leprosy? After. Because he is one of them now. He has walked in their shoes. He has experienced what they've experienced. He's now an outcast like they're an outcast. He's suffering the same kinds of pain. So can you tell where I'm going with this one? Is God one of us?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because he came. It's the only God who anybody worships that has wounds. You ever thought about that? I mean, just think about what he went through. His own family disowned him practically. They didn't believe in him. They came and dragged him away one time. Remember that? And they said, oh, he's a little crazy. His own family. James finally becomes a Christian, but not during the lifetime of Jesus. Friends failed him. Remember in the Garden of Gethsemane, would you just pray with me? The worst thing imaginable is happening to him, and they conk out. And they run away. Peter disowns him. So he said just a while back, I'll stand with you forever. And Jesus said, I don't think so. People walked away from him. He'd give a talk and he'd see him head off and he'd turn to the disciples, are you going to leave me too? And I love Peter's answer. He said, you've got the answer to life. You know, why would we leave? So that was good. But a lot of people walked away. They didn't all come and stay with him. People in authority persecuted him. Given an unfair trial, mocked, beat, scourged. If you ever saw Passion of the Christ, that's really hard to watch, isn't it? But apparently that's pretty realistic. I mean, the Romans, you know, some of these old movies, they show Jesus on the cross with just red stripes on his back. Oh no. So it was really brutal. So hanging on this cross in front of the whole world and abandoned by God. What does he say when he's on the cross? My God, why have you forsaken me? I mean, it's a cry. Now he's quoting one of the Psalms, but he's doing more than quoting. He has actually lost that eternal connection that he had. So we're never going to go through something like this. There's a story of 3 men who are facing Judgment Day. They're all gathered near the throne of God, and they're going to be walking up, and God's going to pass judgment on them. And they said, wait till I get in front of him. I am so upset. And they all had their reasons. First person, I got hanged for a crime. It wasn't even my fault. I'm going to let him know. That was unfair. Somebody else said, well, I died from this lingering disease. I had it for years. It was terrible. I was in pain. I couldn't do the things I wanted to do. Third person said, my son got killed by a drunk driver. I've got a few words that I'm going to share with this guy. And so then they reached the throne and saw the judge. Nail-scarred hands, side, and each mouth was stopped. Because he's gone through all of these things. That's pretty amazing when you think about it. Okay, now some people will say, all right, so we do things to other people. Okay, so you can blame it on the fall, blame it on free will. But what about, wasn't it just Morocco just had an earthquake?
Yes.
Yeah, Morocco. What did they estimate? 10,000 dead or something? And Libya had this big flood go through. Did you see that? The heart of the city, one city, it was a wall of water, 20-some feet high. Whew, came through and just, apparently thousands are dead there. They're finding bodies all over the place. Well, I'll just do one example. This is a photo of the San Francisco, aftermath of the San Francisco earthquake. A lot of it was fire,
Right.
you know, but it just, you know, looks like Dresden after World War II or something.
Germany, yeah.
Yeah. So I've read some things because I was kind of curious about this whole natural catastrophe thing, but apparently if you want to have life on Earth, you have to have things like plate tectonics. They're an absolute necessity. If you don't have plate tectonics, you don't get life. Well, the problem with plate tectonics, you all know, they rub up against each other and then they slip once in a while and you get San Francisco. You've got to have winds, you've got to have wave action, you've got to have all these things that can certainly cause problems. And people build homes on these fault lines, or they build homes like in New Orleans under the level of water and hope that a levee of some kind is going to hold the water back, and it doesn't always work that well. So there are actual answers, I think, for natural catastrophes. We have to have them. Here's a really, really hard one. In fact, an atheist brought it up one time to a Christian and said, what are you going to say at the bedside of a dying child? And is there anything worse than a child suffering? That's just terrible. But you know, there is a Christian response to this. So let me start with how most people who are not Christians, how they see life. You're born and you live and you hope this part here doesn't have much bad stuff because you got death coming. And if you feel like you got ripped off here, like a kid doesn't get as much space here, or you're dealing with a huge illness for half your life, then you feel kind of ripped off. Is this the Christian view of reality, though? Here's the Christian view. There's birth and there's death, and if you have a hard time here, okay, that's not pleasant, but look what you got afterwards. You got eternity. And there are enough verses, by the way, that seem to suggest that children under a certain age are going to be in God's presence anyway. Some people debate that, but I think it's pretty clear. Age of accountability, they call it. So that child is going to live on. Well, why doesn't God do more? There's another question we hear. But I want to tell you again some more stories. I told you there'd be a lot of stories here. So sometimes the suffering brings about something good. It's not that suffering itself is wonderful, but good things can come about. So anybody know the story of MAD? You know anything about the person, Cindy Leitner, who started it?
Her son was killed by a drunk driver.
Yeah, I think it was a daughter.
Yes.
She got, the daughter was, I think, 13, got killed by a drunk driver who had 3 priors for drunk driving, and still out there driving on the road, and smashed into her and killed her. So instead of just folding up, she started MAD, and has now, I don't know how many lives have been saved, but they've really tightened up some of these laws that let people just drive no matter how drunk. So was that a terrible thing? Oh, definitely. And nobody's trying to make that seem lighter than it was. It was awful. But a lot of good has come out of it. And I'm not suggesting God did that so good would come. I'm just saying he can take the terrible things and turn them into good. Here's another story kind of like that. You ever seen America's Most Wanted? Yeah, do you know the story behind John Walsh?
His son was playing video games in Sears or something like that?
Yeah, his son got abducted, and they found his body a few days later. So he got interested in trying to put away some of these people that had done these awful things and were fugitives. They were still out there, and they could attack again. And I read that the last account, it was something like 900 people had been caught because of the television show.
Oh, amen.
900 fugitives. So again, do you see the bad things produce something useful? I've got a book here I wanted to share a story with you. You heard of The Case for Faith? It's the follow-up to The Case for Christ. So it's the same idea. Lee Strobel, in this case, he takes on 9 or 10 of the most common challenges to Christianity. And the other one is all about Jesus. You know, did he really live? Did he really die? You know, all that kind of stuff. So this one looks at different issues, and one of them that he focuses on is, how can you say there's a good God when there's pain and suffering? And so one of the people that he interviews is a man named Mark Herringer. And Mark, I mean, again, this is awful to even think of. He accidentally backed up over his child. And the last few moments of that child's life were spent in his arms. And the child passed away. He said so deep was his despair, he had to ask God to help him breathe, to help him eat, to help him function at the most fundamental level. But he came out of this, he said, as a changed person. He abandoned a career in business. He went to seminary. And it says now he has devoted the rest of his life to bringing God's compassion to others. And he was in the pulpit for the first time. Can you imagine? You know, trying to talk to a congregation. So he drew on his experiences, and it said people were captivated. It seems like he had special insights, empathy, and credibility. In the end, dozens of them responded by saying they too wanted to know this Jesus, this God of tears. So he says, sometimes, this is Mark talking, sometimes skeptics scoff at the Bible, saying that God can cause good to emerge from our pain if we run toward him instead of away from him. But I watched it happen in my own life. So I'm talking about the depths of terrible things. So I'm just curious, again, I was thinking if you have a story here, I hope nothing as horrific as these, but are the things that you've gone through, and because you went through it, it either influenced other people around you or you came out of it as a stronger believer? Yeah, Georgie?
I was at work and my intestines exploded on me.
Oh.
And I didn't know it at the time. It was just very painful.
Yeah.
And so I went to the emergency room, and I was a 2-pack-a-day smoker. And for years and years and years, I wore the patches and then would tear them off and light a cigarette. I spent $750 on a psychotherapist, you know, meditation, everything. And I went into the hospital, and they removed a bunch of intestines, and I came out of that hospital a non-smoker. And it's been 6 years.
Oh, yeah.
And that, anybody that knows me, I was a dedicated smoker. And I prayed every day for God to relieve me of the desire for cigarettes. And boy, did he do that. He went a long way around the barn to get there, but something good God can bring out of something terrible.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Great
Careful
story.
what you pray for.
Yes.
Other stories where God's redeemed something useful? Yeah. Is it Maria?
Yes.
Hi, Maria.
So I met the Lord 6 years ago. I didn't know Jesus I didn't know God. But I was going through a really, really bad divorce. And I started praying to the God I didn't want, because I didn't want the divorce. I still got divorced, but I got Jesus instead. So God revealed himself to me. Someone from my work, because I work for a place where I see a lot of women, and she gave me a devotional book, and I started reading it, and I thought, how come no one told me there's love? And I said, I need to find out about this God that loves me, and it started from there.
Wow. Wow, that's great. Any other story?
Mine's a work in progress.
This is Diane.
I'm a retired LVN, licensed practitioner. I was married 30 years, divorced. Married a second time to a man that had heart issues. And heart issues turned into 2 transplants of his heart and a kidney. And he got better, and then he divorced me.
Oh, what?
And then I met Benny, and I said, God, bring that companion into my life. And Benny and I are very much in love, and he's a liver transplant. So I think that's God's funny sense of humor.
Yeah, Benny's not here tonight.
No, he's got a cold. Pray for him.
Oh, okay. So we've all, I'm guessing more of us have had those kinds of stories, but that's okay. We'll keep moving here. But good things can come out of some really awful things. Here's a question. In the middle of suffering, can we trust God? I don't know if you're aware of this, but there was something at this church, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It's called cardboard testimony. Any of you here for that? So people would walk out on stage and they would have one side of a cardboard that they'd written something on, and they'd say things like drug addict or alcoholic or depressed, or, whatever it was. And then it was silent. All they do is flip the card over, and it was what God had done for them.
Nice.
And it was just beautiful. I mean, I had tears in my eyes watching this, person after person after person coming up, without having to get embarrassed to tell a long story. It was just, this is what I was, this is what I am now. So here's a woman, wandering and unfulfilled. She flips it over, found my purpose and joy. And so in the middle of suffering, can we trust God? So we have a history with God. All of us do, as Christians. Some of us longer history than Christians longer. But again, I'm looking for stories tonight of God. And now, this time I'm talking about in your good times, God's done some great things for you. So when you go through the tough times, you look at those good times and you say, He's been there for me. He's done this for me. He's done that for me. So I know that I'm going through this is not because He doesn't love me. Tim Keller, who just recently passed away, he said, sometimes we don't know why we go through suffering. He's a really interesting pastor. Take a look at some of his material. Got some great books. So Keller said, we go through things and we sometimes don't know why we're going through them. There's, all of these things I'm putting up here may not apply. You just can't figure it out. But he said, one thing we do know, we're not going through it because God doesn't love us. And so I'm just curious, this time I'm asking, what's the good that God has done in your life? So this isn't a question about pain and suffering. This is, what are some of the good things God's brought to you? So I got to start, and then I'll turn it over to you in just a second. About 3 weeks ago, one of our grandchildren was baptized here at the church. And before that, about a year ago, we have 4 grandkids. And I pray all the time that those 4 stay close to Jesus. And they all go to church here, which is nice, so I get to see them. But already 2 of them have been baptized, 2 to go. And I feel so fortunate because A, they're in the community that I'm in, so I don't have to travel to Peoria or someplace to see my grandkids. So they're here and they're locked into Christianity. And I'm just praying that that continues. But that's just really, it warms my heart. I'm so happy about that. I think God's been really, really good. So now, stories. What's God done for you? Positive, not pain and suffering issues. Don.
Yeah, Don Schulson, 2 weeks ago, both my granddaughter and my grandson were baptized. And that was a real blessing. The best thing about it is that he has been reading 2 chapters a day in the Bible. He's never done that.
Oh, wow. How old is he?
He is 17.
Great.
Yeah, and so he's finished. He started out with Deuteronomy. And why, I do not know.
Wow, he's still reading?
But he's in Matthew now.
Okay.
And but that was a real joy because
Sure.
Corinda, when he was about 6 or 7 years old, confessed about who Jesus Christ was and his life and everything. And he just never was quite right in getting baptized. Well, on the 27th, him and his daughter, or his sister, both got baptized.
Wow. That's really great. Yeah. Hey, by the way, that just reminds me, I don't know if I told you, but I have an article I wrote that's just 2 pages long. Did I mention that at all? It's just best Bible chapters. Okay, I don't know if I did. If it remind me, I'll send it out to all you guys. But I taught the Bible as literature at Palomar College for years. A lot of fun. And I realized a lot of people, they don't read the Bible at all anymore. You know, they don't even know what's in the Bible. So I thought, well, if you just tell them, read the Bible, it'll be good for you. It's like, they're going to start in Deuteronomy. Or worse than that, they'll go to Leviticus. Whoa, okay, done. So what I did is I took the best chapters, about a quarter of the Bible, and I put it in story form so they know what they're getting into. You know, what are they going to encounter in Genesis? What's going to be in Exodus? You know, whatever, a little bit of 1 Kings, you know. And so they kind of know what the whole story of the Bible, and there are chapters that go with it. And it's not complete books, it's just certain chapters. So if you remind me, I could send that out to you. David.
Am I the only one who thinks Deuteronomy is a phenomenal book? The only one in the fan club?
No, it's actually good stuff in there. Yeah, Georgia.
So I went to Shadow Mountain down in El Cajon for like 8 years, and we got tired of traveling back and forth, so I've been praying to find a church. And my daughter and my son-in-law brought my granddaughter here, and I came with them because I had never been to Emmanuel Faith before, and they wanted to put her in a preschool. So we're all standing around, and they were showing us the classroom, and all of a sudden I just had this urge to go walking around, and I came over here and I saw the office. I walked in the office, and Janelle and Josh were there. And I could never find a Bible study anywhere in Escondido, so we always had to go to Lakeside. So I came and I asked Janelle and Josh if they knew of anybody up in Valley Center, and they told me, yeah, Ben and Bernice. And it was like God said, go to the office and I'll set you up. And I've been here ever since. It's been like 7 months, and now we're on our second turn of Bible study up in Valley Center. It's amazing.
This church is really big on small groups because it's a big church. And if you just go in and out of the church service, it's easy to get lost. But yeah, they've got lists of different homes and what they cover and age groups, and there's just something for everybody. So yeah, I'm glad you found that. Yeah, Jan?
I can relate several times in my career where the Lord has stepped in and saved me and had me avoid some very serious situations. One time I was working in a steel mill as a supervisor, and I stopped into a job site, John, to relieve myself, and I did that. I came out the door and I walked about 10 feet in this large timber, probably 12 by 12 by 3 foot long, came flying down from up above where the ironworkers were putting up a 130-foot tall steel building above me, and that went right through the roof of that outhouse, and I had just left there about 10 seconds before. Goodness. Wow. And then later on the same project, I'm walking down through one of the aisleways, and there's again ironworkers up over my head. I learned to stay out from under them eventually, but there goes this wrench down, and it landed right at my feet. And I'd taken one more step. I'd have been hit with a wrench coming down 130 feet.
Yeah.
Also on that job, the trench caved in 10 seconds after I got out of the trench, too. So in my career, the Lord was there, and I didn't even know He was there, but looking back at it, I had some close calls, and He protected me.
Wow. Well, I mentioned that SALT Sunday school class. So yeah, they just have a new president in there, a guy named Ross, really nice guy. So I was talking to him the other day, and he said, I'm going to tell some stories for this class. He said of how God's protected him in Vietnam. So I said, oh, I'd like to hear that. So yeah, we all have a history with God, and there's so many of the good things that have happened that if we do, not if, when we go through some tough times, we can say, yeah, but He's been there for all these good things that have happened to me. There's a story of a man. He wrote a book, and this is one of his chapters, and he's talking about the whole issue of God. Is God really there? And issues like, can we trust God? And he said his wife was breastfeeding their baby, and she left. She said, I just have to go a short distance to the mall or something. And he said, okay. And she didn't come back, and she didn't come back, she didn't come back. Several hours have gone by, and the child is crying now, and he's kind of pacing around. But he said, but I know her history so well. I mean, we've been together for so many years. I trust her. I know she's not just in the car heading toward Arizona, you know, and she's not doing something stupid. I trust her. And things worked out okay. But I mean, he was going through kind of a tough time there, but he had so many good times with her over the years. He knew she wouldn't do something dumb because he knew her character. So that was okay. And then one last story. This is pretty grim. It's set in West Virginia 30, 40 years ago, and a mine caved in and all sorts of bad gases and stuff were going through. And they were trying desperately to get to these guys. But by the time they did, only 1 out of 13 made it. And the rest of them died. But they were alive long enough to know they probably weren't going to get rescued. And one of the miners, who had a deep faith in Christianity, he wrote a note on the back of some kind of form there, and he said, we'll meet again, or I'll be with you later. And so, I mean, again, he's going through something awful, but he had such faith in God. He said, I know He'll take care of this. Last week I mentioned Ignatius, one of the church leaders, and he was being put to death, and he kept saying, he had a chance to write letters as he was going to his death, and he said, I know Jesus really did live. I know He really did die on the cross for my sins. So he had utter conviction that that was true, it was real. And so did that miner. Final thoughts. I'm going to go really quickly over this because I don't like to keep you all late. You recognize this? Looks like an Old Testament prophet. Yeah, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. So, number one, where is evil? I mean, it's easy to point, oh, that group, oh, that person, that's evil. But you notice our finger is always going out. And here's what Solzhenitsyn said. The line between good and evil, he says, it doesn't run through states or classes or political parties. It runs through every human heart. You know, we might as well point this way instead of saying, oh, you evil people out there. Yeah, so are we. All worldviews have to deal with the problem of evil. You notice how Christianity, it's always like, well, you guys, you think there's a good God, but there's evil. Ha! And all of a sudden, we've got the burden of trying to prove something. But you think about every other worldview, they're still evil. So what are they going to do with it? Well, let's just take one. How about atheism? You know, atheism can't even complain about the problem of evil because there can't be evil under atheism. Atheism says there's no standard, there's no God out there, so we just create our own standards. So you can't call that evil. You can just say, I don't like it. Right? Because you've got to have a standard beyond us that we can all look at and agree on. But that isn't the case with atheism. Where are they going to have hope? You know, I told you there was an atheist who said, hey, you Christians, what will you say at the bedside of a dying child? Well, flip it around. What's the atheist say? Tough luck, sorry, things didn't work out right, it's the end. Really? That's where you're going to leave that child? How about Hinduism? It says everything is an illusion. All of life is an illusion. Evil is just an illusion. Really? The Holocaust? 6 million dead Jews? That's an illusion? What kind of worldview is that? Or the invasion of Ukraine? That's an illusion? Seems pretty real. How about Islam? They say their God, Allah, is the creator of evil as well as good. And so that gets pretty fatalistic if you think about it. There's a story that there was this railing on an apartment complex in a Muslim country, and the railing had given way, and they didn't fix it because if people fell over, that was what God wanted. Wow, that's fatalism, just saying, oh well, let's see what happens. Al?
I worked in Saudi where we have lots of Muslims. I've been driving down a 2-lane highway going over a hill and watched an Arab driver come across the top of the hill, and as he's going over, takes his hands off the steering wheel as he goes over the hill, and he can't see what's coming because it's all in God's hands.
Oh man, remind me not to drive.
There's a lot of wrecked cars beside the highway.
Yeah, I guess so. Wow. Christianity is opposite of these. It has a really robust position when it comes to pain and suffering. I mean, first of all, it predicts evil. It says, yes, of course there's evil. It's real. It's not imaginary, but it's got a solution. You don't just say, well, suck it up and get through it. There's a solution that Christianity offers. Number 3, again, these are just final thoughts, but there are no such things as utopias on earth, right? People sit down, they work out this idea, you know, Marx, this will be the perfect society. How's that working out for places like Colombia or whatever it is? Or Venezuela, that's what, yeah, Venezuela. It doesn't work too well. On paper, it looks pretty good. American presidents come in, they're all excited, and the public's behind them, great, and they get like 30, 60 days of happiness, and then people realize, oh, wait a minute, they're not bringing everything I wanted. So I always feel sorry for president. I don't care what party it is. It's like they make these golden promises. It crashes and burns within the first 6 months. And number 4, we should be practicing our responses because we know we're going to go through this, but we need some preparation along the way. And I just put a few ideas here. Having Christian friends that can give us some support when it's our turn to go through the fire. And then we're supposed to help others. And there are all these Christian organizations, and I ask you to think of maybe some others. I just got a chance to, this is one of my old students at Palomar College. I ran into her on campus here the other day. She's now the head of alternatives here in Escondido, which is the pregnancy center, and all the things they do for women. Just amazing. It's unbelievable. Open Doors and Voice of the Martyrs deals, especially behind countries that were part of the Soviet Union or Islamic countries. World Vision tries to help young kids. Samaritan's Purse has been active in some of the things we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years. Anything else I'm missing up here? Is there an organization you like a lot?
I actually just found out
Lisa?
about a new one at a concert. It's called Compassion. And so it's similar to like the World Vision with the sponsoring kids, but they partner with local churches in their communities and have like tutoring centers, and then so that money specifically goes to make sure that that child actually hears the gospel along with their food and their medication and their education. And I was really impressed by that. I had never heard about that company.
It's called Compassion?
Compassion.
By the way, if you're ever concerned about where the money goes, you know they have to do reports, and you can go to find websites that will tell you what % of that dollar that you gave them actually gets out to do whatever it's supposed to do. Some of them are amazing. They'll spend 15, 20, 30, 40% of that money on just fundraising and office expenses, so it's not getting out to where it's supposed to be. Others are very good about that. Yeah.
My wife was asking me about a book that she had seen some years ago. What would the world be like without Christianity?
Oh.
And so we got to brainstorming about it. We wouldn't have any hospitals, we wouldn't have any orphanages, we wouldn't have any colleges.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just 3 things.
Yeah, just 3. Yeah. I told you I had some resources, and again, I'll send you an email that's got the outline of everything on there. I think out of all of these, I really like If God is Good. It's Randy Alcorn's book. It's pretty thick, but you can just skip through parts that you want to take a look at. I was going to bring it tonight, but I didn't want to lug it, but it's an excellent book.
Oh,
yeah,
I
Bridget?
a little story. But, my husband was dying of pancreatic cancer about 6 years ago, and we had been teaching Sunday school to the 5th graders, and they had all been praying for him. And when he died, some of the boys came to me and said, "Why did he die? We were praying for him to heal. You know, what what good is it that we prayed and he didn't heal and he didn't get better? And then I said, well, actually, your prayer was answered. He is completely healed. He is in heaven in a better place, and he's completely healed and whole.
Yeah.
So God had a better answer for them. So that was nice to tell them that.
That's a really good answer.
Really good.
This is Phil Yancey's book, Where's God When It Hurts? This is Oz Guinness. Forgot. Case for Faith, I mentioned that. That's Lee Strobel. And this is Tim Keller's book. It's maybe a little more philosophical. This is maybe a little more practical, but they're both really excellent books. Okay, so I mentioned next week Steve will be talking about the universe and design. Let me close and thank you all for coming out tonight. Father, I thank you for at least letting us wrestle with this issue. It's been around for a long, long time, and it's not going to go away, and we certainly don't feel like we have all the answers tonight, but at least it's some things that we can think about and share with others if they have concerns about this. And we pray that we would be prepared for the pain and suffering that this world has. And we thank you that you brought your son into this world, and you've taken on the pain and suffering, and that you understand us, and that we worship a God with wounds. And thank you for this class, and just bless people as they go about this rest of this week, and ask it in your son's name. Amen.